Welcome to Older Militarist Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics. And what we do is all for free, and for our love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church. And we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. We're coming back again to the book by Adam Lebor, Complicity in Evil, United Nations in the Age of Modern Genocide. Please get you this copy of this book. It's linked on the show page. And we're going to begin on the first chapter on what were the safe areas in Bosnia. So when we think of the Bosnian War, we don't really know much about from the details we know of, but let's ask the question and see what answer we get from Mr. Lebor. When and who was behind the war crimes in Bosnia? The video begins with the Orthodox priest blessing the Serb paramilitaries before they go forth. They stand in a row, AK-47 assault rifles in their hands, red berets atop of their shaved heads, flanked by two giant black flags. The priest brushes the soldiers' heads with a handful of greenery as they file past. The date stamp shows that it is 7:30 p.m. June 25th, 1995, a few days before the Serbs' final attack on Srebrenica. The recording then cuts to a road in eastern Bosnia. It is a warm, sunny day, sometime after the capture of the town. The soldiers, member of a unit called the Scorpions, are standing around a green army truck. The prisoners scramble out, hands tied behind their backs. They are Bosnian Muslim civilians. Their faces are gaunt and fearful, their clothes dirty and ragged. One is bleeding heavily from his face. The Serbs sneer and mock, ordering the prisoners to lie in the grass, close to each other. One, Asmir Adisfak, is 16 years old. Another, Safet Feliz, 17. Asmir wanted to be a doctor. He fled Srebrenica on July 11th, the day the town fell, returning briefly to kiss his mother goodbye, before trying to flee north to the city of Tuzla. The boys and men wriggle closer to one another. One man's feet are bare and move from side to side, pale flashing in the dirt. The scorpions smoke, chat, and joke. They're completely at ease and do not mind being recorded, for they believe they are far beyond the reach of any law, with the absolute power of life and death, until there is no reason for them to think otherwise. Until recently, the prisoners lived in Srebrenica, a United Nations safe area protected by Dutch peacekeepers. More Serb soldiers appear, and they mingle and talk for a while. They ordered the prisoners to march around a bend in the road and to walk off the road into the grass. Asmir, Savet, and others obeyed, their heads bowed. The Serbs ordered them to line up and walk forward, one by one. The first prisoner shuffles ahead. One of the scorpion shoulders his weapon, peers down its sights, and takes aims at the prisoner's back. So we're going to move on next to the people who captured a third of the nation. And who did the United Nations think it was negotiating with? The fighting began in June after Croatia and Slovenia declared independence. After a few days skirmishing, the JNA pulled out of Slovenia, but Croatia, home to 650,000 Serbs, was a different matter. By winter 1991, with the help of the JNA, rebel Serbs had captured about a third of the country, which they renamed the Republic of Serb Krajina. RSK's leader was a sinister, baby-faced dentist named Milan Babic. His forces had committed widespread war crimes, including mass murder and ethnic cleansing. The United Nations considered Babic a serious negotiating partner. Warlords who should have been arrested for war crimes, and who later were treated as Balkan statesmen, a pattern that would continue through both the Croatian and Bosnian wars. Among the UN's interlocutors was the British diplomat Sir Mark Golding, head of peacekeeping. He recalls in his memoirs, Babic was a major thorn in our flesh, but I liked him and admired the power of his intellect and his fearlessness in his fearless defense of what he saw as his people's interests. Babic's fearless defense of his people's interests brought them and him nothing but misery. Babic committed suicide in March 2006 in his cell at the UN detention center in The Hague, sentenced to 13 years in prison for crimes against humanity. Now we're going to get to understanding how the UN did not understand Bosnia. Shashi Tharwar, Merrick Golding's bright young special assistant, and Herb Opkun, an American diplomat, met Vice President Israel Janik in Belgrade. Janik said that the EC had given Bosnia a week to apply for recognition as an independent state, but to do so without the consent of all three communities, Bosniak Serbs and Croats, would violate its own constitution. War would break out, but he told Tharwar that the train is about to leave the station, and if we don't take a ticket, we will miss it. Gannick asked for 10,000 peacekeepers. Tharwar said his delegation would convey his request to the Security Council, but he thought it unlikely that the council would agree. Tharwar recalls, this was the level of expectation from the Bosnians, based on the persuadance rather fecklessly of the European decision that had not been formed in the crucible of the United Nations, and had not been discussed with other members. It was unthinkable that a Security Council with India and China on it would send troops to a sovereign member state of the United Nations to help a part of that state secede. It was impossible. We said that we understood his dilemma, but if the Europeans are pushing you into a corner, have them send you 10,000 troops. But the Europeans weren't geared up for that. Now we get into a Peruvian man who really didn't care about Bosnia, didn't really care about wanting to know about Bosnia. It caused a lot of problems. General Secretary Javier Perez de Cuellar, a Peruvian diplomat who was coming to an end of his second term, warned Germany that recognizing Croatia would, by forcing Bosnia to decide on independence, spread the war. But it was the United Nations, not the EC, that had a peacekeeping department with troops deployed across the world. And it was the United Nations, not the EC, that had the moral authority to call for emergency action to prevent a conflict of which it had clearly been forewarned. When war started in Croatia, Hungary and Austria both warned the Security Council at the very moment this spills over into Bosnia, it will be hell, recalls Andrei Erdros, Hungary's ambassador to the United Nations, who sat on the Security Council from 1992 to 1993. We knew the conditions in Bosnia, we understood Bosnia because of our history, but some others did not think like this. On April 6th, the EC recognized Bosnia Herzegovina, and the Serbs commenced their dismemberment of the country. Bosnia joined the United Nations the following month, theoretically protected by Article 2 of Chapter 1 of the United Nations Charter, enshrining member state territorial integrity, and Article 51 of Chapter 7, guaranteeing the right to self-defense. The United Nations, it seemed, would ensure that this did not happen. So we're going to now learn about the man who replaced Caviar and if he was worse than Caviar. Up in his office on the 38th floor of the United Nations Secretariat building, with his panoramic view overlooking the East River, Secretary General Boutros Ghali seemed little interested in Bosnia. A francophone Egyptian Christian, Boutros Ghali had succeeded Perez de Cuellar in January 1992. The sixth Secretary General famously dismissed the Bosnian conflict as a rich people's war. His critics argued that he blended Gallic pomposity with a secretive authoritarianism. He certainly resented the influence and power of the United States with the United Nations. Boutros Ghali was an old-style diplomat of the Sorbonne School, says James Bone of the Times of London, a veteran UN correspondent. He resented all attention that was given to the Balkans, which he thought came at the expense of conflicts in Somalia and elsewhere that were being ignored. I think he was wrong because the rich people's wars are much more dangerous than poor people's wars, and he never really understood that. Boutros Ghali regarded himself as one of the world's diplomatic elites, licensed to solve all the world's problems, says the United States diplomat, then posted to the United Nations. Boutros Ghali saw himself as the commissar of the world. He never wanted the United Nations to be involved in Bosnia. He assumed correctly that Bosnia would chew up the United Nations and destroy his term as Secretary General. But instead of being robust, he went to the opposite extreme. Boutros Ghali did not find life in the war zone to his taste. On 31st December 1992, he visited Sarajevo for 6 hours. You have a situation where it's better than 10 other places all over the world. I can give you a list of 10 places where you have more problems than Sarajevo, he proclaimed. His audience was so shocked that nobody thought to ask him to list the 10. The Sarajevo airport seemed to have a particular effect on international diplomats. That same month, David Owen, the EC negotiator on Yugoslavia, proclaimed there, don't, 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 don't live under this dream that the West is going to come and sort this problem out. Don't dream dreams. The Bosniaks saw this as an invitation to surrender, but in a way, Owen's brutal honesty was accurate. And we learned how the Bosnian defenders were sort of silenced. In New York, Bosnia's defenders struggled to even make their voices heard. The Security Council is a non-democratic body. You have first class and second class members. If one of the P5 coughed and the secretariat went into action, but the 10 non-permanent members were second class citizens, recalls Andre Edros. You can be qualified, skilled, and with expert command of an issue, an informed, eloquent speaker. But if you are a non-permanent member, it was hard to attract attention. You had to make serious extra effort to make yourself heard. Edros and his colleagues perpetually struggled just to find out what was happening on the ground in Bosnia. They complained repeatedly to the Secretariat to no avail. That information was circulated late, or not at all, and that the Secretariat reports were incomplete, a pattern that later repeated itself with respect to Rwanda. We get into how the documents and orders become decided upon. The ambassadors of the P5 and the 10 non-permanent members sit around a large horseshoe-shaped table, flanked by their aides. One wall is covered by a giant peace mural, a gift from Norway, showing a phoenix rising from its ashes, symbolizing the world being rebuilt after 1945. Steep rows of chairs stretch back to the rear of the chamber, while interpreters look down from behind their high windows. The floor is covered with light brown carpet, the walls lined with darker brown wallpaper. The resemblance to large municipal theater is quite apt. Most of the dramas that play out here have been carefully scripted by the P5. By the time Erdos and the other non-permanent members arrived, everything had been decided behind the scenes. The P5 or the P3 had discussions among themselves, agreed on a text, and presented it to the meeting, saying, "Take it or leave it." It was very difficult to change or modify it. The whole operation of Nine Nations was conducted in this spirit, hence the inability to do anything. Now we're going to get into the reason why the United States didn't want to have anything to do with Bosnia. Again, it deals with money, oil, and everything else. So let's hear about it. The contrast was sharpest with Kuwait, swiftly liberated after it was attacked by Iraq. Resolution 678, passed in November 1990, called for all necessary means, including military intervention, to be used to force Iraq to withdraw if Saddam Hussein did not pull back by January 15, 1991. A coalition of the willing was formed under U.S. leadership. The land war began on February 23rd, and 4 days later, Kuwait was liberated. But there was no oil in Bosnia. Secretary of State James Baker summed up the U.S. position. "We do not have a dog in the fight." Words that 10 years later come back to haunt him. Instead, the United Nations imposed sanctions banning trade with Serbia and Montenegro, as well as sporting, scientific, air, and maritime links. But the Security Council balked at the military intervention, arguing that in the very complex context of the events in former Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, all parties bear some responsibility for the situation. Although it's hard to see how the civilians targeted by Serb snipers bore some responsibility for their situation. There were no robust enforcement mechanisms to ensure that the sanctions bit. Serbia quickly set up front companies in Greece, Russia, and Cyprus. and the flow of oil into the country barely slowed. We're going to get into the peacekeeping. The UN production force was developed, but the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations could barely protect itself. Night after night, the few remaining elderly Croats in Serb-occupied areas were murdered. Golding and Theodore warned after a trip to the conflict zone in January 1992 that peacekeeping would not work in Bosnia. There was no consent for peacekeepers, no ceasefire, no suitable environment for peacekeepers to operate in, and no concept of operation acceptable to all parties. Despite these constraints, UNPRO FOR provided the useful fig leaf for the P5, and in June its mandate was enlarged to cover Bosnia, specifically to keep the Sarajevo airport open. And we'll come back tomorrow with show 5 on the next part of the deal on the safe areas. We'll be doing morning updates with Brother Alexis on the Artsakh genocide. Then around this time, we'll come back and do our shows of Adam Lebor on the UN and tell you about the real UN safe areas and what they really are and why those Armenians who want UN peacekeepers to go in and do what to do, they have no idea what they are asking for. So this is another reason why we'll do the morning updates on the Artsakh genocide with Brother Alexis and come back and give you the real data and the real truth on the UN peacekeepers. And so that way you know exactly what the UN peacekeeping deal is all about. This is Order Military Radio TV signing off. Yes, well,